Hi, and welcome back to another one of our online lectures here in world history. Today, as we continue our unit on Islam, we're going to start looking at three very important Islamic empires. We're going to look at the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. Each one of them were empires expanded really under the umbrella of Islam, and we're going to take a look at some key ideas from all of them. So, as we look at our constructive response question, it's really going to be the same question for all three groups. So the question says, generalize who were the Ottomans, the Mughals, and the Safavids. And we're actually going to look at that question three separate times, really separately for each one of those groups. And as we study each of these groups, we're going to kind of figure out some key ideas, such as where were they located, who were they, meaning kind of what did they do and who were some of their key leaders, and we're going to answer why are they significant. And in some cases, we'll be able to talk about their decline as well. So that's really what we want to be able to learn from each of these groups. So what are we going to look at? We'll start with a little bit of Islamic culture here before we get to our first group, the Ottoman Empire. We'll kind of lump those two together, but then we'll do the Mughals and the Safavids separate. So again, what we really want to look at with those three groups is where were they located, who were they, and why were they significant. So we're kind of getting a little snapshot of each one of these, some of the most important information out of all of them. Let's set the stage, talk a little bit about that Islamic culture. According to the Quran, it says, men are the managers of the affairs of women. Well, we don't have to look too far. The media covers this pretty well. Women in Islamic culture are definitely not equals, even though what the Quran says is it says that it will declare that men and women as believers of Islam are equal. However, in the household and in everything else, men pretty much run the show. So men are the managers of the affairs of women, and righteous women are therefore obedient. So we see a lot of Western media and whatnot trying to demonize Islam for that reason. And there's some truth to this, that women just don't have the opportunities. Most women, like you see in the images here below, have to cover themselves when they go out in public. So that is definitely a negative side of Islamic culture, at least in the eyes of the West. It depends on what perspective you take on this, of course. But in the eyes of the West, we would look down upon that. But what's kind of cool about Islamic culture is that when Rome falls, and Rome does fall officially in 476 AD, you'd think that knowledge and information that the Romans had held on to, that Roman scholars had been building up in libraries and things like that, that would disappear. And it doesn't, because of Muslim scholars. So after the fall of Rome in 476, Muslim scholars preserved and expanded much of the scientific knowledge that had been gained during both the Greek civilization, they never were an empire, the Greek civilization and the Roman Empire. All this great stuff was written. Philosophers wrote, they thought, they generated information and knowledge, and the Greeks and the Romans held on to that. But once those civilizations are gone, it's very easy for that information to just disappear in history, and it has happened several different times. But Muslim scholars continue to translate this information and keep it sacred and preserved throughout the chaotic times that would be ahead for most of the Europeans. So that's definitely a big positive of Islamic culture. In the early 800s, the House of Wisdom was built in Baghdad as a place where different cultures worked side by side to translate texts from Greece, India, Persia, and elsewhere into Arabic. A lot of the information we have on the Greeks and the Romans comes because of these different translations, and the House of Worship was able to keep a lot of that information alive. So we rarely give the Muslims credit in history for keeping history available to us. So that's pretty amazing. And again, with everything changes with events like 9/11. We start to look at religion in different ways because those who attacked us on 9/11 claim to be Muslims, but we have to remember that's not what the average Muslim believes in. And so if we can stop and kind of put a new lens on things and say, hey, there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of Islamic culture. In fact, in history, we see a lot of good stuff that has either been created or preserved by Muslim culture. It's really good for us to do that. That builds tolerance, and that's something the world so really, really needs. Muslim scientists made many advances in mathematics and astronomy, and I'm not going to go into too many specifics here, but there's definitely a lot of evidence and a lot of different things in math and science that came from Muslim scientists. Here's another negative. We'll talk about the Atlantic slave trade later in second semester. Slavery existed in Africa long before the Europeans went and took Africans over to the New World, because the Muslims had been trading through Africa and would introduce the idea of slavery in Africa long before the Europeans would get there. So that's not something that's really talked about too much in history, at least not on the surface level of your average history course. Now, because Islam was growing after the time of Muhammad, you're going to see the rise of three important empires: the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire. And as I suggested, we're going to see a short video on each one of these, explaining where they are and really what their importance was in history. And all of them do very much claim to be Muslim empires. That's very important to understand, because some empires don't really declare religious affiliation and others do. These are definitely three empires that very much believed and even fought for Islam. So we're going to start with the first one on our list. We're going to start with the Ottoman Empire. They are actually one of the more impressive empires in all of history, because of not only how long they were in power, but some of the things that they were able to achieve. What we're going to notice here, and you're going to see several different maps, they really are the Byzantine Empire. They conquer the Byzantine Empire, which was once the Roman Empire, and they expand a little bit beyond that. So this is just one of several maps you're going to see on the Ottomans. Here's another one. Again, the Byzantine Empire would be pretty much this region right here. They're going to add some area in Africa, a little bit on the Arabian Peninsula, and that's going to become the Ottoman Empire. There is an episode of Crash Course on this. We're not going to see that right now. We'll have either watched it already or we'll be watching it shortly after this video. So let's talk about who the Ottoman Empire was. But in order to do that, we have to first ask the question of where were they located. And I kind of just showed you this on a map. Certainly we see another map here. Location always matters. Location is so important to the success of a civilization, because if you're in a desolate, remote area and you can't trade or you don't have access to resources, you will not survive. So that's why we put such a heavy emphasis on geography each time we look at a different group of people. So they were located in Byzantium, as I mentioned, and Anatolia, which is part of mostly encompassing modern-day Turkey. By 1566, their lands had included Hungary in the north, Egypt in the south, Algeria in the west, and Mesopotamia in the east. And that's pretty much what you see right here. So their empire is very, very large. It's almost as size of the Roman Empire at its peak. The Roman Empire certainly would have had this land up here, up into Britain. But it's pretty close in terms of landmass. All right, who were they? Let's talk about some important rulers, some important things they did in order to make this empire a success. Anatolia was home to many descendants of nomadic militaristic Turks who had a long history of invading other countries. And when I say Turks, we're talking about a group of people, and they happen to be Muslim. In fact, these groups had formed military societies under leadership of an emir, which is a chief commander, and followed a strict Islamic code of conduct. They raided other territories of infidels or people who didn't believe in Islam, and these infidels lived on the frontiers of the Byzantine Empire. So this is definitely a very militaristic group. I think we use that word here, and I think it's probably the best word to describe. Many Anatolian Turks saw themselves as Ghazis, or warriors for Islam. So when we talk about the Islamic culture being a little bit more violent, here we have that connection. Doesn't mean that they're all violent killers. That is not the case. Even in the modern world today, some people mistakenly think that. It's just their history is based out of a little bit more violent area than some other religions. One of the first big leaders was a guy named Osman. Osman was the most successful Ghazi, and because of his name, followers started calling them the Ottomans in the West. So that's where we get the name the Ottomans. It actually comes from Osman. And the Ottomans were really, really successful because they relied on gunpowder. There's no doubt that gunpowder really would give you a big advantage. So they replaced their archers on horseback with musket-carrying foot soldiers. They also were among the first people to use cannons as offensive weapons. Even heavily walled cities fell to an all-out attack by Osman and the Turks that would later be known as the Ottomans. So gunpowder played a very big role in this story. And all three of these empires we're going to look at, again, the Ottomans, the Mughals, and the Safavids, which you see here, they're all going to be gunpowder empires. They all use gunpowder to attack and conquer. Now, some of the successors, Mehmed I and Mehmed II, led expansion of the empire through 1566. They're going to continue to add land to the Ottoman Empire. For example, Mehmed II captured Constantinople, and he opened it to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. The Muslims renamed it Istanbul. This is very tolerant, opening it up to other religions, allowing other people to come in. And we often sometimes make that wrong association that the Muslims were not tolerant, but that's not the case. Many of them very much were. And here the Ottomans under Mehmed II definitely prove that. So here's a picture of Mehmed I and Mehmed II. Kind of want to know where Constantinople is. We've seen this. Again, this was the Byzantine Empire here under the Romans. It will later be conquered by the Ottomans, and they're going to take Constantinople here, and they're going to rename it Istanbul. We're going to zoom in just a little bit here to another image of modern-day Turkey, and you can see right here it is labeled as Istanbul. There it is. Now, one of the most identifying features was Justinian's Hagia Sophia Church, built under Emperor Justinian. Very, very beautiful. It's later turned into a Muslim mosque. And we talked a little bit about these images that you see inside of it that help identify that. Another leader, Selim the Grim, captured Mecca and Medina and Cairo for the Ottomans, so added empire down here in Egypt and certainly on the Arabian Peninsula, the two most holy cities in the Muslim faith, Mecca and Medina. Of course, Mecca is home to the Kaaba. So here you've got Selim the Grim and the area he conquered. Another one, by 1526, a guy named Suleiman. Suleiman the lawgiver controlled the eastern Mediterranean Sea. He added Tripoli in North Africa and extended power into Europe. And he was really the most powerful monarch on earth at his time. And fun fact, Suleiman was very fond of wearing big turbans. That's not a joke. That's actually true. So these are just some of the leaders that helped expand the territory of the Ottomans. Now, why are they significant? Well, as mentioned, the Ottomans acted kindly to those they conquered. They often improved the lives of the peasants living in their territories. So in a way, you were glad the Ottomans came in and conquered and took over because life improved under you. They had good trade networks, certainly had good militaries, and they were able to keep peace in the areas that they controlled. And that's how you have a strong empire, is when you can control your territory. Not just if you can conquer it, but you have to be able to control it afterwards. And there's no doubt they had one of the largest empires in history. The Ottoman Empire really doesn't come to an end until World War I. World War I, we see this shift and change. The Ottomans really start to, their empire just starts to weaken, and they no longer can control all that territory. And we have a lot of independent countries that come out of it after that point. Well, that's going to do it for us here today on the Ottoman Empire. As we look back at our constructive response question, ideally what we're looking to answer here is, where were they, who were they, and why are they significant? In the Ottoman Empire, as we really look at where were they, we talked about how they were part of the Byzantine Empire and Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. Certainly we talked about how they had land in Hungary and Egypt, Algeria, and Mesopotamia. So we've got a good understanding. We've seen a couple of maps of where they're located. It's really kind of the eastern half of the land around the Mediterranean Sea. As we look at who were they, we talked about several different leaders. We talked about Osman, who really is where the name Ottomans comes from. We talked about Mehmed and Mehmed II. They captured Constantinople and renamed it Istanbul. Certainly, we looked at how the Hagia Sophia becomes a mosque. The Hagia Sophia was, of course, built by Justinian under the Byzantine Empire. We talked about Selim the Grim and how he captured Mecca and Medina. And we talked about Suleiman the Lawgiver and how he really was able to add land in North Africa, extending the reach of the Ottoman Empire. So they were a pretty powerful Islamic empire. They acted kindly to those they conquered and often improved a lot of lives in the process. So we've got a lot of good information we can use to answer that question. So that's going to do it for us here today. Hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.